Time for episode 4. I was going to do what I've been doing in the first 3 episodes and look at some NFL slates and some cricket slates, seeing as that's all the sport that I'm playing at the moment. But I failed to get my lineups in for today's NFL slate. Spent some time last night making them all and got to work this morning. Went to have a look how they were going, and I hadn't entered them, which has happened a few times this year. So that is annoying. I'm not going to punish myself by seeing how they would have gone. So yeah, I'm not going to worry about that. The NFL, I could have looked back at the 2-game slate on Sunday, but I didn't do very well. And 2-game slate is usually not that interesting. And cricket, I've been doing a lot of that. I'll just be going over the same kind of player takes, even though there's always new players coming in and out. So I'm going to do something a bit different. I'm going to have a look at my AFL and NRL spreadsheets in anticipation of 2026 season in a couple of months. Just sort of give you an idea how they're set up. Both of them, I think I started building spreadsheets for DFS about 2018, 2019. Just started from scratch, opened an Excel spreadsheet, and literally just worked it out as I went. I didn't just had whatever skills we all have from school. They're pretty rudimentary, probably. I'd say very unique because I've literally just made it up as I've gone. But yeah, I think in the last couple of years, I've built some tools that are quite helpful. And even if they're not, I think one of my big strengths is that I'm getting much different answers to the test to everyone else. And that's fine in DFS because there's no right answer. Yeah, so I'll get them up. Start with AFL. What am I doing here? Bear with me. All right, so the other thing about this is that I haven't necessarily moved all the players to the new teams and stuff. I don't worry about that till closer to the season. So starting with each team gets their own tab, their own page. Got everyone there who has been on the team in the past, and I've got rookies in there. So column by column, I've got player age, which is just based on their birth year. It's not accurate to the day. What year they were drafted, what number they were drafted. The position column is something I changed halfway through 2026. I'll probably go over that a bit more in a second when I do some DVP stuff. Same as the cricket sheets I've shown you. I've got notes for each player. Those notes are often out of date because I don't necessarily stay on top of those every week. And then I've got over on the right here, I've got all their past scores. I've got some scores in orange for injuries. I've changed how I've dealt with that a fair bit over the years, sort of back and forth. Sometimes I take the injury games out of the sample, which is like this one here where you can see injury. Down here, injury, injury, injury. I have recently started keeping the injury games in the sample, and I just haven't gone back and fixed those ones because they're so far back, they're not super relevant to the numbers I'm using anymore. But yeah, I've got all the raw numbers there. Last season, I started making some notes. I don't think those are coming up. You can see the little tab in the corner. When I hover over those, I've got notes that pop up. So this one's about Sam de Koning, tells me the games where he was playing as a ruck. I can go back and I've got some highlighting in purple, which also tells me when they were playing a better role than they usually do, which is often in the ruck, sometimes in the midfield. And yeah, then same as I showed on my cricket spreadsheets, I break it up into what they averaged in the previous season, what they've averaged in the previous 2 seasons, 3 seasons, and what they've averaged for their entire career. Well, not their entire career, but everything I have in the sample. So, out of all that, I sort of come up with a base projection that I like for each player, and I just every week when I put in the raw stats. So after each game, I use Fan Footy or DFS Australia, and I enter all the raw scores. I'll just be like whatever they score, blah blah blah, and then not 898, 89. And then I'll sort of eyeball someone like Max Holmes, 92, 98, 102. He's sort of been on an upward trajectory for a few seasons, and I might start the season with him at 102, or take the 89 out, at 103, what he averaged last year. He sort of had a good run with no injuries. There's, he's turning 24 this year, so there could be a little bit more upside in his body. He sort of can't get a much better role in the team. So I might just start the year with him at 103 where he was, and then as the year goes on, I'll move that up and down. Sometimes within the week, if we get a bit of news about injury or role changes or something about why the player's more motivated for a milestone game or a certain opponent or something, I can just make little tweaks to that number. But basically, so I've used a lot of different systems over the years, and I've completely redone these spreadsheets from scratch a few times when I've had what I thought were bright ideas to improve everything. Often I've ended up wasting hundreds or thousands of hours doing that. But I guess not wasting, because I learnt lessons from it and I ended up with something that kind of works for me. But I feel like I had roughly this system about 3-4 years ago. And I've gone through 2 full rebuilds in that time, in 2023 and 2024, and both times I just had to revert back to what I used to do. But maybe I found a couple little improvements and a better understanding of what I'm doing. Anyway, so that's the raw number, and that's I've got the objectiveness of what they've averaged in the past, but I've got the subjectiveness of sort of, do I think they're a bit better than that? Do I think they're a bit worse than that? How are they going right now? Obviously, my knowledge and the information isn't totally complete. So there's heaps of little errors in there, but I've just found using an algorithm based on like last 10 games or whatever the algorithm I've tried to use in the past is just doesn't suit the way that I build lineups. I much prefer to back myself to come up with my own number, and that way I've got something very unique to everyone else. And when I'm right, I get rewarded for it. So a few things I built in recently. Over here, I've got a DVP column that feeds back to, well, actually, it comes off, it just feeds off this position column over here. So every week for the 22 that are played, and I'll have to adjust this year because we're going to have 23 in the team. Each week, I pick 7 forwards, 7 mids, 7 defenders, and 1 ruck. That's just how I set it up every week. So this number up here has to add up to 46. Midfielders are 2, forwards are 1, defenders are 3, rucks are 4. And those numbers correspond to up here, which is, that's my opponent for the week, how forwards score against them, how midfielders score against them, how defenders score against them, how rucks score against them. It's like it's all based on a percentage. So Bailey Smith, this would have all been from last season. So against the Lions, midfielders minus 1.7%. So that just takes 1.7% off his score. It's not perfect. Like, it means I have a much bigger impact on high projected players than this low projected player. But that's the best I can kind of set it up with my skill set. And I think DVP, some kind of DVP is worth having. So I just apply it equally to all players. I sort of have the subjective choice of what position I apply to someone. And then these numbers here feed back to, so I get that DVP number for each position, feeding back to this page, my rankings page. And this page is very complicated. I'm not going to be able to tell you all the things that are going on here because I tried to set it up to help me with betting and whatnot. It's sometimes been useful for that, but I find I don't really have the time to consistently worry about betting. So there's a lot of columns in this sheet that aren't very useful. But these ones in purple are what I use. This is complicated as hell, but basically this feeds back to another sheet yet, but come up with a how does that work? Okay. Anyway, there's not much point telling you about this, but this is where I come up with the final number for each position's DVP plus or minus for each opponent for the week. I have a home and away column, which I have a separate sheet I'll show you in a second, where I work out a rough home and away number based on where the game's being played and what impact that has on the team's total score. And it's a combination of position and home and away that I come up with like my final plus or minus percentage of my raw projection. So I've got a home and away column here. Every team's like total team fantasy score, either at their home ground, at a neutral ground, or at an away ground. And then, yeah, for every team, I get a plus or minus percentage, which for most teams isn't huge. It's like 1 to 2%. There's a really big one. I know, like the Cats, I think, have the biggest one. At home, they're plus 4%. Away from Victoria, they're minus 3 and a bit percent. Dogs have a pretty big advantage at Marvel. Yeah, the Bombers are terrible outside of Victoria. The Suns are good in Darwin, but that's a small sample that I've got there. The Hawks are really good at Marvel and UTAS. I suspect Marvel's probably one of the better scoring grounds overall. So most teams have a pretty positive number for their Marvel games. So yeah. Oh, and the Hawks outside of Victoria and Tasmania minus 6%, which is dreadful. That's probably going to even out as my sample gets bigger. So I usually don't use that 6% number. I put in to the rankings page, I put in a subjective number for the week. But anyway, that's how I deal with home and away. I've only been doing that for about half a season. I don't really know if I'm getting much advantage out of that, but it's giving me kind of a unique answer to everyone else. This is my DVP. There's actually a few DVP pages here. So I start with this page, matchup page, which is just total points conceded by each team. Have all their points for a few seasons back that they've conceded. Same as the players, I organise it into columns for each season. And then I come up with a rough number that I'm sort of happy with based on how they're travelling at the time. If a team finds a bunch of form halfway through a season, that number might be a fair way off their historical numbers, or yeah. And I have like a competition-wide average, so I can try and keep my my numbers sort of averaging out roughly the same as how the competition's travelling. So that gives me a team level number, and then for each position, this one's pretty painstaking to do. I have to go through every week based on how I've got the players divided up into 7 forwards, 7 mids, 7 defenders. I record their scores. Again, like the opponent's scores by position against. I have come out with a historical average for that. Again, I only started doing that partway through last season, so I've only got one season's worth of numbers because it's excruciating to enter it all. And again, I'm putting in my own numbers and I'm trying to get those numbers to average out to the same team number that I came up with on the other page, or as close to it as I can. And then I get a percentage for each position for that, and then that feeds over to these numbers here in the rankings page, and then they feed over to the opponent's DVP score for the week. So that's pretty complicated shit, I would say. Again, I have no idea if it's better or worse than anyone else's approach. There's been some seasons in the past when I haven't used DVP at all. There's been some seasons where I used DVP off other sources like the DFS rankings site that used to exist. DFS Australia, Morta's site. There's a few different NRL ones where I use DVP stuff from like Supercoach, which was not ideal, but yeah. And to be honest, like the seasons where I didn't use it at all and I just used my base projection every week, didn't worry about opponent, I did just as well. So I don't really know if all this effort to come up with my own DVP numbers is worth it, but now that I've done it, I'm going to continue using it through this season at least, and yeah, see how I go with that. There's one more page for the AFL, which is a ruck page. Obviously, ruck's like kind of a bit different to other positions. Like if Jared Witts is out for the week, who's pretty much the hardest ruck matchup there is, and buddy Ned Miles in, then the Suns' ruck history is kind of worthless. So I've split it up into individual players and just done the same thing. Whoever the lead ruck is for the week, or sometimes I organise them as a ruck combo. Track all the scores historically. I swap in, when there's ruck changes, I swap in other rucks from down the bottom here for the team, but it's always organised here by the team. Have all their historical points against, and it's like obviously there's a lot of noise in that sample because if they're playing against Max Gawn more often, it's totally different to playing against like the combination of Goldstein and Draper and other shitty ruck combos of bad rucks like that more often. So you need a pretty big sample size for this to be useful, I would say. So I went back a few seasons when I created this last year, and it might only be 2 seasons, is it? Yeah, I've only got 2 seasons worth of data there, but it's it works out about how you'd think. Like Witts is really difficult, Gawn's really difficult. Players like O'Brien, Cherry, Grundy, they're all pretty hard to score against. And yeah, Flynn was the easiest last year, as we know. Nank's pretty easy to score against. Darcy and Jackson as a combo were surprisingly easy to score against, but that's because Darcy's hardly ever fit and Jackson's running around in the forward line or the midfield. Anyway. So that's how the ruck thing sets up, and then whatever, if Witts is out and Moyle's in, I just swap Moyle into that row, and then the Suns ruck matchup will become a positive one instead of negative 14% like it is against Witts. And that is all the DVP. I can't believe I've spent almost 20 minutes on that. It's pretty complicated. Anyways, that's like, it takes a bit to maintain that. And up in the top row here, I've got the team level, how many points the team scores each week on average, season by season. And I sort of try and keep my team total reasonably close to that number. Up until now, I've had to build in the sub score as part of that. So the sub projection doesn't count. And for each team, I had how much their sub scores on average across the comp. It was just under 25 points. Some teams like the Suns barely use their sub very much, or they bring them on in the fourth quarter pretty late. So theirs is much lower. Some other teams, I think the Dogs were on 27, the Blues, Swans, I think. Yeah, Swans. they're up closer to 30 points, so they more often bring their sub on earlier. Maybe more injury issues, but I think just tactical as well. So I had to factor that into my total team projection, and yeah, just try and keep my projection across the team like in a realistic range of what they normally score. Which means if that number's way too high, I go through and like try and pick out some guys where I'm like, okay, they haven't been going great late. They've probably lost their role. Try and work out who they've lost their role to. Drop that projection a decent amount. So yeah, it's a pretty involved process. But once I get in the swing of the season, it's just wait until teams are named, swap, whatever guys in and out that are playing, not playing. Make sure I've got the right spread of position designations, change projections based on any role changes I'm expecting. That's right, I've got this structures page as well. So every week when teams are named, I've got the 22 from the previous week there. I swap in any players. I work out, this is people might recognize this from T-Better back in the day. This is roughly how T-Better set up his team structure spreadsheets. And yeah, I just built something similar. It could be a lot simpler. I could just have columns for defender, mid, forward, because that's how I set up my DVP now anyway. When I used to use other people's DVP, it needed to be broken up into more positions. Yeah. And one of the reasons I use simpler DVP, just defender, mid, forward, is because I get a bigger sample size that way. And yeah, some of the other ones, you might only have 2 players each week that fit into a category, like key forward or something. And over a sort of a 10-game sample, you might only have, say, 25 data points, which can be pretty noisy. I know they do things to even that out, take out injury scores and stuff, but yeah, I just like a bigger sample size where I can get it. So yeah, teams are named, I come here, I change who's in, make sure I've got the structure the way I want it. Then I go to the team page, where's the Blues, change the players here, set all their positions up right. Then anyone who I think might have some kind of role change, I'll adjust my projection for them. Make sure the team total is about where I want it. And then, yeah, those are my projections for the week. And I use the numbers in this yellow column, put them into my CSV file for the solver, head over there and build lineups. So that's the AFL. And NRL is quite similar, so I won't go through everything again, but yeah, similar thing. I've got the same kind of setup on a rankings page, which can give me betting information if I want it. Exactly the same for home and away. I've got even smaller sample sizes for home and away here, so I quite often fudge the numbers a fair bit that I end up using. DVP, I've got it broken up into smaller positions in the NRL because positions are less subjective. Everyone's named in a certain position and they play there. Not as much guesswork. But then I pull, so fullback, wing, centre, I come up with an outside back number out of that. And all outside backs get that percentage. What have I got? I've got half hooker, do I? Oh no, I'm not sure if I'll continue this, but I found that halves and edges have about a similar DVP impact across teams, probably because they defend in a similar, like they run at the same part of the defensive line, I'm guessing. And yeah, mids and hookers, and then bench gets their own treatment, which is not ideal, but you get a pretty big sample size across the season of bench scores. So I'm just going to have to make do with that. Same thing, team level points conceded. I've got a couple of seasons of data for that. That's useless. What else have I got? No, that's it for the NRL. And so, yeah, same thing. I end up with a percentage number up here for each position. I don't organise players the same way in the AFL, so in the NRL. So in the AFL, I'll show you that quickly. George Hewitt, there's just one line for George Hewitt. Every score he's ever got is on that line, no matter what role he was playing. And I just have to subjectively work out about what he should average in the role he's playing. I don't have his history broken up into different roles. Oh, again, that's because it's not easy to nail down exactly what positions people are playing in the AFL. Whereas in the NRL, you know exactly what position someone's playing every week. So I've got, I've got various rows for each player. Who's someone who plays a lot of positions? Well, Nick Meaney's one, so I've got a Meaney there, Meaney the centre. I've got 42 games in the sample for how he performs at centre. Got Meaney the fullback down here, 30 games in that sample. I've got to have some more Meanies than that. I've got Meaney the winger, 39 games in that sample. I'm sure I had him as a 5'8" and a bench player as well, but maybe not. Anyway, there's plenty of players like that. Wishart the benchy, Wishart the halfback, Wishart the 5'8", Wishart the hooker. So yeah, it's a bit more work at team lists in NRL. Have to, even if a player's still playing from last week, he might have shuffled positions, so I move all that around. Just because the scoring is quite different across positions, as any NRL fantasy players know. Oh, my nose is gone for some reason. Yes, and then otherwise all the same sort of principles apply. I'd have to do the minutes in the NRL. So I did a study at some point, roughly how many minutes anyone playing in the backs plays, fullback through to halfback. It's like just over 77 minutes on average, so I just apply that to everyone. There you go, I'll do it. And then I do the forwards in 5-minute increments, and to try and get that minutes number up the top to add up to 1,040, which is how many minutes are available in an NRL game. So across the 13 players on the field. Yeah, so if I was doing the Storm, this iteration of the Storm team, I'd have to find two guys to give an extra 5 minutes to, and I'd probably give them a little projection bump based on that. And there's a website called footystatistics.com. I use that to look at historical minutes, and yeah, I have this page, this calculator page here where I can copy and paste stuff across from that website and muck around with the minutes projection and work out what they might average with the amount of minutes that I'm expecting them to play in this game. Again, like, it's taken me years to build that up. It's reasonably complicated at this point, I would say. It's probably not giving me much better results than when it was very simple. Again, I used to just have these historical scoring columns and this column, and I used to just use that raw projection of mine in the cruncher. I didn't worry about DVP. I didn't worry about minutes or any of that stuff. That's just little layers of complication that I've built that aren't really necessary, I would say. And that's it for the NRL. And yeah, the way I've got it set up, every week, whatever the matchups are. So I might have a quick look at the first round of NRL. Just to show you how that looks. So first week of NRL, we got Bulldogs are playing Dragons. So every week when the games are over, I just set this up for the next week. We got Knights playing Cowboys. Don't know if they're the most exciting Vegas games, but at least they're kind of somewhat evenly matched, hopefully, at the start of the season. The Storm and the Eels. The Warriors and the Roosters. The Broncos and the Panthers. The Sharks and the Titans. The Eagles and the Raiders. The Dolphins and the Rabbits. And the Tigers are on the bye. And I copy these cells up to refresh everything in the new spot where I've put it. And then, yeah, all this purple stuff repopulates for the opponent for the week, and that just automatically goes over. So, for example, the Storm, who are playing the Eels, they have slightly positive matchups at most positions, except for middles. I mean, I would go through and work out. So these games are in Vegas, so no team has a home and away advantage. Storm are playing the Eels at Amy Park, so I'd go to the home and away. I'd say the Storm at Amy have a 2% advantage, and the Eels away from Sydney minus 2.65. So I'd put in, let's just say I want to do those exact numbers. Sometimes I play around with them a little bit. And then, yeah, that's going to improve the positional matchup for all the Storm players. It's going to take a decent amount away from all the Eels players. And then that feeds over into each player's DVP matchup over here, which boosts their final projection in the yellow column that I use. And there you go. I think that's about all I can show you. I know most people aren't going to spend thousands of hours of their lives building stuff like that. There's a lot of people who have proper kind of coding or computing skills who can build something way better in way less time, obviously. Props to those people. I should have spent some time over the years developing those skills. But yeah, I quite enjoy the process of manually entering the numbers every week. I feel like it just helps me form thoughts about each player, which feeds into my subjective ranking. No matter what kind of system or algorithm you build for projections, there's always a manual component. You're never going to build a nice algorithm that takes into account role changes or how that player's health is or the team struggling or anything like that. And my brain isn't that good at building those things in either. But I like the process of, doing it all manually and just coming up with my own kind of answers to the test. Quite enjoy that. Yeah. So let me know if you have a process, if it's massively different. Like, I'd love to hear about some of that stuff. And if you don't have a process, like, I recommend trying to build something. There's heaps of information out there. When I started, I followed a lot of American DFS players and read a lot of articles and watched a lot of videos about strategy and just slowly over the years started building something. Like I said I started these spreadsheets in 2018 or 19, but I think it was at least 2020, maybe 21 before I was using the projections in a cruncher or anything like that. Initially, I just had a projection column and a value column, and I would type in everyone's price in another column and see and sort it for the best values by price for the week. And I'd just hand build my lineups based on that. So there's some pretty basic ways you can do it too. But I think having a full history there of scoring gives you like a really good chance to overcome recency bias. Yeah, not get too carried away with the player who's been in some good form when you can see like they've only ever averaged 80. Sure, they might have gone 105 in the last 4 weeks or whatever. That doesn't mean you should project them for 105, like maybe 90, whatever, like whatever your personal feeling is about how they're actually going. And I definitely get my bias is being anchored too much to historical scoring. So that's something I've been trying to work on, but I don't know. Like the field's bias is recency bias. So if my bias is in the opposite direction to the field, that's better than nothing, sort of thing. And that is 44 minutes in. That's plenty. Sorry, I didn't do any slate breakdowns or player analysis. Something very different tonight. I hope it wasn't too horrifically boring. I'll see you on Thursday.